In the late 1700s, rugged settlers floated down the Ohio River westward on keelboats and flatboats. These early settlers, in search of a bright future, were struck by the beauty of the Kentucky and Ohio hillsides. It has been said that the Ohio River Valley reminded the German pioneers who explored it of their own Rhine River. One of those early settlers, John Baker, chose to build a new life for his family in what is now known as Augusta, Kentucky. Little did they know that these fertile hills would someday yield more wine than anywhere else in the United States. Thus, the early roots of the Baker Bird Winery were planted.
Welcome to the Baker Bird Winery, one of the most historic wineries in America, and it has even survived a Civil War battle. The Baker Bird Winery is one of 22 wineries in America on the National Historic Registry of Places, out of 8,000 wineries. Also, about 70 acres around the winery of the original vineyard land is on its own National Historic Registry of Places. The winery survived a Civil War battle, so we are on the National Civil War Heritage Trail. Kentucky has a long history of viticulture. The first commercial vineyard in America was put in between Louisville and Lexington in 1797. Also in 1797, Philip Buckner, a Revolutionary War soldier, moved 40 families from Augusta County, Virginia, to this area and started a village today as we know as Augusta, Kentucky. One of those original 40 families was John Baker, and he was on the original tax rolls of Augusta in 1797. Now, John brought out his oldest son, Abraham Baker Sr., in 1799, and Abraham married a local girl, Polly Bowman. Abraham and Polly had several children, and their oldest child was Abraham Baker Jr., who built this winery in 1850s. John Baker was one of the original settlers of Augusta, Kentucky in 1797. He brought out his oldest son, Abraham Baker Sr., in 1799. Abraham married a local girl, Polly Bowman, and you can see from their marriage bond that he put up 50 pounds to marry Polly. And if he didn't marry her, then her family got to keep that money. So it was like an insurance policy. You will marry my daughter or else. It was also a show of wealth because you could cross the ferry into Ohio territory and marry there without a marriage bond. Now, Polly and Abraham Baker Sr. had several children, and their oldest son was Abraham Baker Jr. And Abraham Baker Jr. did not marry until later in life. He married in the 1850s, and you can see from his marriage bond, it looks very different from his father's, but he did pay just 50 pounds to marry his bride. So even after 50 years, the cost of getting married stayed the same. And notice that even as late as 1850s, it is still in pounds and not dollars, because it wasn't until the Civil War that we converted in general throughout the U.S. to dollars. Now, it's coincidental that since Abraham Baker Jr. was born in 1811, the family bought the property that the winery sits on in 1811, and the original deed covers the land between Turtle Creek on the west side of Augusta to Little Bracken Creek on the east side, and covered a tremendous amount of acreage. Okay. What would possess Abraham Baker Jr. to build a 12,000 square foot winery in the middle of nowhere? Because let's face it, 160 years later, we are still in the middle of nowhere here in Augusta, Kentucky. And of course, there were several factors that contributed to that. One was the Germans moving into this area. We have Mr. Baker's wine license dating back May of 1864. He paid the Internal Revenue $10 to be able to make and sell wine here at the winery. The winery hasn't changed much over the years. And as you can see, this is a picture postcard of the winery that has been slightly enlarged, and the winery looks very similar as it does now. but the postcard was postmarked 1911. Our goal is to be able to restore the winery, support the local farmers growing grapes, and produce premium wines for everyone to enjoy. The name of the winery is Baker Bird. We named it after the German tradition for wineries, in that you name the winery over who built the winery, Baker, and then who currently owns it, Bird. Today our goal is to help support the local farmers and economy and produce premium wines again that everyone can enjoy. In 1840, 5% of Cincinnati's population was German. By 1850, 50% of Cincinnati's population was German or their firstborn American children. This area was known as the America's Rhineland along the river because it was so beautiful and reminded those German immigrants of their homeland. As you can see from this pamphlet, many of these pamphlets were printed up and sent over to Germany to encourage people to move here to the Cincinnati area. It made the Cincinnati area look very picturesque, with riverboats on the river and vineyards terraced along the hillside, so that it encouraged people to move to this area. And then as they immigrated through Cincinnati, they moved out to the local rural area, like here in Bracken County. From the immigration rolls of Hamilton County, we know that many of those immigrants were from Baden, Germany, still one of the great wine-growing regions of the world today. And oftentimes they describe themselves as vine dressers. It is not uncommon that we have locals come into the winery and they can actually find their ancestors on those original immigration rolls. The Germans were very important in the wine region because they would know how to plant the vines, how to make the wine, as well as build the structure. But another very important person was Nicholas Longworth. Nicholas Longworth moved from New Jersey to Cincinnati with $1 in his pocket in 1801. He studied the bar and subsequently became one of the richest men in America through land speculation, because in 1850 Cincinnati was actually bigger than Chicago. Today what we know as Eden Park was also about 200 acres of his vineyard land. And he had such a passion for making wine that in 1850, Nicholas made a bottle of champagne from grapes grown in the Cincinnati area, sent it to Paris, France, and it won a blue ribbon. So that must have been quite an impressive accomplishment for an American to make such fine champagne that it would win a blue ribbon in Paris. Closer to home than Cincinnati is here in Bracken County. And records show in 1856 and 1857 that there are about 200 acres of grapes in this county. And to put that into perspective, as late as 2012, there were only about 200 acres of grapes in the whole state of Kentucky. So there were a lot of vineyards in this area. A New York wine merchant came out in 1857 and purchased wine produced here in Augusta and paid $2.50 a gallon for the wine, which was a 50 cents premium, suggesting that it was very fine wine. Records also show that 1864 and 1865 that over 36,000 gallons of wine was shipped out of Augusta at $2.50 and $2.36 a gallon. Now think about that for a moment. At that time you only made $1 a day in wages. We were in a civil war, a very tragic war in that we lost more Americans in the Civil War than we did World War I and World War II put together. And the federal government was broke. So 36,000 gallons multiplied by $2.50 or $2.36 was a tremendous fortune at the time. We also have from May of 1864 Mr. Baker's wine license, and he paid $10 to the Internal Revenue to be able to make wine. Now, historic markers about 2/10 of a mile away state that half the wine consumed in America at one point in time came out of Augusta, Kentucky. So this was wine country. Today, it's just historic wine country, and we're carrying on that tradition of making fine wines and premium wines for people to enjoy.
Baker Bird, the thoroughbred of wines.